Francesca Lowell had one rule when it came to men in the bookstore: don't flirt with the customers, especially the quiet ones who read for hours and never buy anything. So naturally, the one man who tested that rule over and over again was the one who sat in the corner by the window every Wednesday afternoon, glasses perched on his nose, a paperback always in hand, and a latte he never quite finished. His name was Ben, at least that's what he told her the first time she asked. Just Ben. Francesca had met her fair share of pretentious grad students and bored tech guys escaping their startups. But Ben was different. He didn't check his phone. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't say much at all. Yet somehow she always found herself pulling a chair over while restocking shelves just to sit a little closer to him. You ever gonna buy one of those books? Or are you just auditioning for a library ad? She teased one afternoon, arms crossed as she leaned on the counter. Ben looked up from his worn copy of The Great Gatsby, a slow grin forming. I like the ones with creased spines. They feel lived in. So do I, she said, before realizing how that sounded. Her face burned. I mean books, not people. I figured. His eyes crinkled behind his glasses. He was handsome, but in a soft, unassuming way. His dark hair was always a little messy, and his clothes looked like he'd rolled out of bed and grabbed whatever was closest. She liked that about him. He looked normal, unlike the customers who wore cologne that cost more than her rent. Ben was simple, safe, a bookworm who sipped coffee and asked her about her favorite poets. And that's why she let her guard down. They started talking more each week. She learned that he'd moved to the city recently, didn't say where from. He liked old movies and hated cilantro. He never talked about work. He always asked about hers. One rainy afternoon after the lunch rush, she sat beside him at the little table by the window. You know, she said, watching the raindrops race down the glass, I used to write stories, mostly. Stopped after college. Why? She shrugged. Life. Rent. Reality. That's a terrible reason, he said. She looked at him. You're just saying that because you probably write too. He tapped the cover of Gatsby. I read more than I write. Still, you get it. He nodded. Yeah, I do. And just like that, something shifted. It became a ritual Wednesday afternoons. Coffee, quiet laughter, conversations that stayed with her long after closing. One night, as she locked up the store, her best friend Harper stood under her umbrella waiting. That's the third time this week you've closed up late, Harper said, eyeing her. Is this about Window Guy? He's just interesting, Francesca mumbled, cheeks warm. Interesting like you want to kiss him, or interesting like you want to write a broody short story about him? Francesca laughed. Maybe both. Harper narrowed her eyes. Be careful. I am. But she wasn't. The next week, Ben brought her a book. A first edition of a poetry collection she'd mentioned once, barely even remembered saying it. I found it at this little shop uptown, he said, sliding it across the table. This is Ben, this is expensive. You shouldn't have. I wanted to. She stared at him. Why? His eyes met hers. Because you're the first person in a long time who feels real. Her breath caught. That night, she went home and wrote for the first time in 3 years. Weeks passed, and their connection deepened. He never made a move, never asked her out, and she never brought it up. It was enough, the way he looked at her, the way he listened, until one day he didn't come, or the next, or the next. She told herself not to care, but she did. She missed his smile, the quiet way he made her feel seen. Then, one Friday evening, while shelving new arrivals, she turned and froze. Ben stood at the entrance, not in his usual jeans and hoodie. He wore a suit, a tailored, expensive-looking one. His hair was styled. His watch gleamed. Ben, she asked, stunned. He walked in slowly. Hey, you look different. I had a thing. She blinked. A thing? A meeting, he said. I should have told you I wouldn't be here. I'm sorry. She crossed her arms, trying to shake off the weird feeling in her chest. You don't have to explain. You're just a guy who reads books here. His eyes flickered. Is that all I am to you? She hesitated. What do you want me to say? He stepped closer. That maybe you think about me when I'm not here. She swallowed. Do you want me to? He didn't answer with words. He leaned in and kissed her. Soft, slow, careful, and everything changed. Her knees almost gave out. When he pulled back, she looked up at him, dazed. That's not just a bookworm kiss, she whispered. No, he said, voice low. It's not. They stared at each other for a long beat before she laughed, breathless. Okay. So, what now? He smiled. Dinner. Tomorrow night. Let me take you somewhere. Somewhere nice. She hesitated. Like, Olive Garden nice or... I'll pick you up at 7. She raised a brow. Ben, I swear, if you show up in a limo, I won't. He paused. Probably. She narrowed her eyes. Who are you, really? He smiled faintly. Just someone who's been writing a story. And maybe now, it's about you. She felt her heart stutter. But she didn't ask more. Not yet. The next night, he showed up in a sleek Blacktown car. Not a limo, but definitely not an Uber. She wore the nicest dress she owned. And when he saw her, his expression softened like she'd punched the air out of his lungs. You look... He trailed off. Don't say nice. I was going to say breathtaking. She flushed. Well, you clean up okay, too. He took her to an Italian restaurant with white tablecloths, candlelight, and a view of the city skyline. The kind of place where you didn't ask for prices because if you had to ask, you shouldn't be there. They laughed through dinner, hands brushing, knees bumping under the table. By dessert, she leaned in, eyes narrowed. So, are you going to tell me who you really are? He looked at her for a long moment, then said, not yet. She blinked. Why not? Because if I do, the story changes, he murmured. And I'm not ready for the ending yet. She didn't understand what he meant. Not then. But she would. Soon. Francesca couldn't stop thinking about the way Ben had looked at her during dinner. Like she was the twist ending he never saw coming. The kind of look that stayed curled beneath your ribs long after the night ended. She had spent the next morning reorganizing the poetry section, trying to ground herself in something tangible. But the echo of his words, if I tell you, the story changes, kept slipping through her concentration like a bookmark falling out of place. She didn't know what she expected when he said he'd pick her up again that weekend, only that it wouldn't be a quiet walk through Central Park. So when he arrived on Saturday afternoon in a navy cashmere coat and held out a helmet instead of flowers, she blinked. I thought we'd do something different, he said, gesturing toward the sleek black motorcycle parked at the curb. You ride. Only when I want to impress a girl who alphabetizes her books by emotional damage. She tilted her head. That's not how they're organized. He leaned in, voice low. I know. She let out a laugh before taking the helmet. You're lucky I like being a little reckless. The ride was exhilarating. Wind in her hair, arms wrapped tightly around his waist, the city blurring into streaks of light and movement. When they stopped, it wasn't at a restaurant or a museum, it was a private rooftop garden atop a building in Tribeca. Francesca stared at the wrought iron gates as Ben unlocked them with a keycard. Is this legal? He glanced over his shoulder. Technically. She followed him up the final stairwell and gasped when they stepped out. It looked like something from a forgotten fairy tale. Ivy-covered pergolas, twinkling lights strung between trees, and in the center, a table set for two with champagne already chilling. She turned to him slowly. Ben. Is this your place? Not exactly, he said, walking ahead. It's one of my favorites, though. I helped design it. Design it. He pulled out a chair for her. I'll tell you everything. But tonight, can we just stay in the in-between a little longer? She hesitated, then Saturday, all right. But you're running out of pages, mystery man. They ate under the stars, the city humming around them like background music. He told her about his favorite cities, little cafes in Paris and bookstores in Kyoto. He never said why he'd been there, only that he missed them. She listened closely, memorizing the way his voice shifted when he talked about places he loved. It wasn't just admiration, it was nostalgia. Like he wasn't just visiting. Like he'd lived 1,000 lives before this one. Halfway through dessert, she leaned in. Can I ask something? He nodded. Why me? He didn't answer right away. Just watched her for a long moment. Then, you talk like you're still trying to find your own voice. And I know what that feels like. She looked down at her fork. That's a little poetic. I write better than I speak sometimes. She glanced up. So you do write? He hesitated. Yes. Published. He gave a small nod. Under a pen name. She narrowed her eyes. Tell me. Not yet. Why? Because once you know, everything changes. She opened her mouth to protest. But he cut her off. Not because I don't trust you. I just want to be sure of something first. Sure of what? That you'd still look at me the same way. Francesca sat back, stunned into silence. Not because of what he said, but because deep down she already knew. He wasn't just a reader. He wasn't just Ben. The next morning, she walked into the bookstore before opening hours and unlocked the register with trembling hands. Something about the rooftop, the way he'd held her gaze like it meant something, had cracked open a door she didn't know she'd closed. Harper strolled in 10 minutes later holding 2 coffees and a raised eyebrow. You're here early. Did Bookworm Boy finally kiss you into a new time zone? Francesca took the coffee inside. He's not who I thought he was. Oh no. Is he married? Tell me he's not married. No. Worse. He's someone. Harper blinked. What does that mean? I think he's famous. Or rich. Or both. Harper slowly lowered her cup. You mean like secret identity rich? Francesca nodded. He has access to rooftops that look like wedding venues. He wears suits with no labels. And last night, he said he helped design a building. Harper whistled. Girl, you're dating a unicorn. I'm not dating him. You're rooftop dining. That counts. Francesca wanted to argue, but instead she just whispered, he's hiding something. Do you want to find out what? Yes. But I'm scared it'll ruin it. Harper leaned on the counter. Maybe. Or maybe it'll be the start of chapter 2. Later that week, Francesca stepped outside after closing and found a small envelope tucked under the bookstore's door. No address. Just her name written in tight, elegant lettering. Inside was a ticket. 1 entrance pass to the Blackwell Literary Gala. She blinked. That was one of the most exclusive events in the city. A who's who of authors, publishers, and literary elite. You couldn't buy your way in, you had to be invited. Attached was a note. We're something you feel powerful in. I'll be waiting by the balcony at 8. B. Her heart pounded. She spent the next 2 days in a haze. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe he worked in publishing. Maybe he was some kind of editor. But her gut told her otherwise. Saturday arrived faster than she could prepare for. Harper lent her a dress midnight blue, backless, with sleeves that made her feel like a heroine on the verge of a plot twist. She arrived at the venue, a grand domed hall with crystal chandeliers and a string quartet playing near the marble staircase. Everyone looked like they belonged on book jackets or magazine covers. Francesca didn't. She stepped onto the balcony just before 8. The city lights glittered below. And then he turned. No glasses. No hoodie. Just a tailored black suit and the quiet confidence of someone who'd been here before. Her breath caught. You came, he said softly. I almost didn't. But you did. She stepped closer. So what is this? Who are you? He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a slim hardcover. Her name was on the dedication page. To the girl who reminded me why stories matter. She stared at it. Is this? I write under the name B. Maddox. She nearly dropped the book. Wait, you're... Yes. That series about the time-traveling poet? He nodded. And the one about the mute violinist? He tilted his head. That one's my favorite. She stared at him. Ben Maddox isn't just a pen name. It's a phenomenon. You've been on bestseller lists for years. I never wanted to lead with that. I wanted you to know me without it. She opened the book again, eyes scanning the dedication. Why me? Because you weren't impressed by anything but the way I listened. She looked up, eyes full. You're a millionaire. He stepped closer. I'm a writer. The money came later. What matters is how you made me feel like one again. Francesca felt the weight of it all settle in her chest. The bookstore. The coffee. The slow unraveling of someone who had everything but still craved something real. You wrote our story, she whispered. He nodded. And I'd like to keep writing it. If you'll let me. She didn't answer. She kissed him instead. And this time it wasn't soft or slow. It was the kind of kiss that rewrote everything. Francesca didn't go home that night. Ben didn't ask her to stay. He didn't have to. After the kiss on the balcony, after the weight of truth and fiction blurred into something terrifyingly real, he held her hand, led her quietly through the glittering halls of the gala, and into the waiting town car that swept them through the city like it knew the urgency in their silence. She didn't speak until the elevator doors opened to reveal a penthouse that overlooked the skyline like it owned it. She stepped inside slowly, heels clicking against polished hardwood, her breath catching at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the midnight blue velvet furniture, the fireplace flickering low behind glass. And the way the city lights made the space glow like it was suspended in a dream. "You live here?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Ben loosened his tie, watching her from the doorway. "Mostly. I have a place in Paris, a flat in London. But this is where I come back when the world gets too loud." She turned toward him, arms folded not defensively, just to hold herself together. "So you're not just a successful author. You're global." He walked to the bar, poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a cut crystal glass, then looked at her. "Does it scare you?" She blinked at the question. "What? That you're rich? Or that I kissed a man who has an entire literary empire under a fake name?" He raised the glass but didn't drink. "Both." She took a breath, then crossed the room to the window and leaned on the frame. "I think I'm more afraid that I don't know where I fit in anymore." He placed the glass down untouched. "You fit in wherever I am. Don't say that so easily. It's not easy." His voice was quieter now. "I've spent years avoiding real connections. Hiding behind words. Watching people try to impress a version of me they think they understand." She turned slowly, eyes meeting his. "And I was different? You didn't want anything from me. I wanted your attention." He nodded. "But not my name." Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Then she asked, "What happens now?" "I was hoping you'd tell me." She crossed the room toward him, her expression unreadable. "I don't want to be a chapter. Or a dedication page. I've done the whole temporary muse thing before." Ben's jaw tightened. "You think that's what this is?" "I don't know what this is," she admitted. "And I don't know if I'm ready to find out." He stepped forward. "Then let me give you time. But don't disappear on me." Something in her softened. "I won't. I just need to breathe." She left that night with a kiss on the cheek and a heart that felt like it was still standing on the edge of that balcony. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. She went to the bookstore, restocked shelves, answered customer questions with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Harper didn't press. She knew that silence could be louder than words. But on the 4th day, an envelope arrived. No note, no sender. Just a slim, cream-colored invitation embossed with gold ink. "Francesca, you're invited to an evening of words, wine, and the author's truth." The address was unfamiliar. The time? 7 o'clock. She showed Harper, who raised an eyebrow. "This has romantic ambush written all over it." "I know. You going?" "I have to." The car that arrived to collect her wasn't a town car this time. It was a vintage Bentley, black and sleek, with a driver in a navy suit who tipped his hat without saying a word. The address led her to a private literary salon in a part of the city she'd never visited. Through the tall iron gates and up the marble steps, a valet opened the door and a hostess welcomed her with a soft smile. "In the library," she said, gesturing to a pair of carved oak doors. Inside, the room was warm with candlelight. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and in the center a single table sat with 2 chairs, a decanter of wine, and a manuscript placed neatly on top. Ben stood beside it wearing a navy sweater and dark slacks, looking more like the man she met in the bookstore than the one who'd kissed her under chandeliers. She paused in the doorway. "You invited me to a book club?" He smiled, not the charming, guarded one he gave strangers. This one was smaller. Vulnerable. Sort of. It's a first read. You're the only one who's seen it. She stepped closer. "What is it?" "I wrote something new. About us." Her breath hitched. "Ben, I didn't write this to publish it. I wrote it because I needed to understand what this is. What you're to me. What I'm afraid of losing." She looked at the manuscript, hands trembling. "And what's the ending?" "I don't know yet. That's why you're here?" He poured her a glass of wine, then sat and waited. Francesca took the chair across from him and opened the first page. It wasn't a story. Not really. It was a letter. A letter written in chapters. It began with the moment he first saw her behind the counter wearing a messy bun and reading Neruda aloud to herself. It traced every glance, every almost conversation, every quiet moment where he'd nearly told her who he was. As she read, her throat tightened. The last chapter was a single page. "I don't need you to say yes to forever. I just need you to say you'll turn the page with me. For now. For real." When she looked up, Ben was watching her like the answer was in her eyes. "I didn't expect this," she said finally. I didn't expect you. She stood, walked to the window, and stared out for a long moment before turning back to him. I'm scared. I am too. But I want to know what happens next. He stood slowly. So do I. She reached for his hand. He took it. Back at her apartment later that night, she sat on her bed with the manuscript in her lap, rereading the final lines. Her phone buzzed. Not a text. A call. I can't sleep, Ben said when she answered. She smiled. Me neither. Come back. I'll read to you. She hesitated for only a second. I'll be there in 10. When she arrived, he was waiting at the door barefoot, holding a copy of her favorite poetry collection. He didn't say anything, just pulled her into his arms and pressed his forehead to hers. And for the first time since that kiss on the balcony, neither of them felt like they were pretending. They spent the night talking until dawn, not about books or fame or fear, but about families, mistakes, what it meant to belong to someone, not own them. She told him about her father, the way he'd left when she was 10, the way she'd stopped believing in permanence after that. He told her about the year he disappeared from publishing, the breakdown no one saw, the therapist who told him he was more than his word count. They didn't fall asleep. They just existed. Together. And when the sun rose and she reached for his hand beneath the covers, he laced his fingers through hers like he'd been waiting to do it his whole life. Neither of them said the words yet. But they didn't have to. Not yet. The story was still unfolding. And this time, they were writing it together. Francesca stepped into the bookstore earlier than usual. The air was still cool from the night before, and the scent of fresh paper and old bindings grounded her more than her morning coffee ever could. But this morning felt different. She took the long route down the poetry aisle not out of routine, but because she needed a moment to think. It had been 3 weeks since she'd read the last page of Ben's manuscript. 3 weeks since she'd stood in his penthouse library, fingers trembling as she turned the final chapter and realized he hadn't just written about her, he'd written to her. Since then, things between them had deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. Not through grand gestures or lavish gifts, though there had certainly been a few of those, but in the quiet moments. Late-night drives through the city with no destination. Dinners cooked side by side in her tiny kitchen. Him reading aloud while she scribbled in a notebook, rediscovering her voice. But it wasn't just love blooming between the lines anymore. It was a life. Did you sleep at all? Harper asked, stepping in behind her with a box of returns. You look like you've been thinking in circles. Francesca leaned on the counter, rubbing her temples. He wants me to meet his mother. Harper's eyebrows shot up. As in mother? Not some metaphorical publishing entity? She's flying in from Vienna. Apparently, she only visits once a year. Well, that's definitely not casual. It's not that I don't want to, she said, reaching for the box cutter. It's just. Everything's moved so fast. 1 minute he's quoting Rilke in a hoodie, the next he's introducing me to society at literary galas and buying me limited edition poetry books I didn't even know existed. Harper tilted her head. Do you think he's trying to impress you? Or just share his world? Francesca paused. I don't know. Maybe that's the question you need to ask him. Later that evening, Ben met her outside the shop, holding 2 paper bags and a twinkle of mischief in his eyes. You cook? She asked, taking the bag from him and peeking inside. Fresh herbs, a wedge of imported cheese, and pasta that probably cost more than her last grocery bill. I don't just write tragic romances, Francesca. I also make a mean carbonara. In her apartment, as he sautéed pancetta and she poured wine, she finally found the courage to ask. Why now? Why your mother? He didn't pretend to misunderstand. Because she's the only person who's ever really known me, and I want her to meet the person who's made me feel like myself again. She stirred the sauce slowly. Is this moving too fast? He set down the wooden spoon and leaned against the counter across from her. I've spent years hiding behind stories, and for the first time I'm not. I know who I am when I'm with you. And that's not something I'm willing to overthink. She looked at him. What if she doesn't like me? She's going to love you, but it doesn't matter if she does or doesn't. I already do. That night he stayed. Not because they needed to be tangled in sheets, but because she asked him to read to her again. He did, his voice steady, fingers trailing absently along her arm as he spoke. She fell asleep somewhere between the second and third poem, but not before whispering, okay. I'll meet her. His mother arrived on a crisp Sunday afternoon. Francesca wore a soft navy blouse and black trousers, her hair pinned back simply. She didn't want to pretend to be someone else. She just wanted to be enough. The restaurant was quiet and elegant, the kind of place where the waiters didn't interrupt and the wine list came in its own leather binder. Ben's mother, Celeste, was striking. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of poise that made everything around her seem sharper. Her accent was faint, a trace of Austria softened by years abroad. "You're the bookseller," she said after the first round of appetizers had been cleared. Francesca nodded. "Yes. And the writer. I'm trying to be." Celeste's eyes were sharp, assessing. "My son doesn't let people close. I assume he's told you that." "He has." Celeste took a sip of her wine. "So why are you here?" Ben looked up, but Francesca held Celeste's gaze. "Because I didn't fall in love with the man who writes bestsellers or lives in penthouses. I fell in love with the man who spent 3 Wednesdays reading the same book just to sit near me." Celeste blinked once, then smiled. "Good." The rest of the meal passed easier. Celeste asked about her favorite authors, her dreams, her thoughts on independent publishing. By dessert, she was laughing at Ben's attempt to reenact a disastrous book tour stop in Prague, and Francesca was laughing with her. As they left, Celeste kissed her cheek gently. "You make him human again." "Thank you." Francesca didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. That night, back at Ben's place, she curled into him on the couch, heart full and mind spinning. He kissed her shoulder and whispered she's never said that to anyone before. 3 days later, Ben asked her to come with him to the private press launch of his newest novel. "I know you don't love crowds," he said, "but this one matters. Because your name's on the first page." The event was held at a rooftop venue overlooking the skyline. Press, editors, foreign publishers, everyone who mattered in his world was there. And for the first time, Francesca didn't feel like an outsider. She stood beside Ben as he answered questions, posed for photos, and signed copies. When someone asked about the dedication, he looked at her. "I fell in love in a bookstore," he said simply. "And every page after that has been better because of her." That night, as they stood beneath the city lights, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Francesca froze. "Before you panic," he said, opening it. Inside was a delicate ring, rose gold with a single sapphire in the center, flanked by 2 small diamonds. "This isn't about rushing. It's not about status. It's about choosing each other, now and always." She stared at it, heart hammering. "Ben, I want to write the rest of my life with you. Not as a character or a muse. As my partner. Will you marry me, Francesca Lowell?" Tears blurred her vision. She nodded once, then again, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, the city blurring behind them. They didn't need a grand wedding that night, or a chorus of applause. They just needed each other. Weeks passed, and Francesca moved into the penthouse slowly, one book, one plant, one coffee mug at a time. She didn't abandon the bookstore. In fact, she bought into it, became a co-owner, hosted poetry nights, started a writing circle for young girls finding their voices. Ben kept writing, but now he gave her his pages first. Always. And every Wednesday, without fail, they still sat by the window of the bookstore just as they had before. Only now he held her hand. And sometimes, when the sun hit just right and the city calmed for a rare second, Francesca would glance at him and smile. Because once upon a time she'd thought he was just a bookworm. She never imagined he'd be her forever. The morning sun filtered through the penthouse windows, casting golden light across the hardwood floors and illuminating the delicate sapphire ring on Francesca's finger as she stood barefoot in one of Ben's button-down shirts, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. The city stretched out before her like a living novel, loud, unpredictable, and brimming with promise. She hadn't slept much, but not because of anxiety or doubt. Her thoughts had been too full, her heart too awake. The engagement had been quiet and perfect, but now the weight of what came next lingered in the corners of her mind like a chapter waiting to be written. Ben's voice broke the stillness from behind her. "You're thinking so loudly I could hear it from the bedroom." She turned as he approached, hair tousled, wearing a soft gray t-shirt and flannel pants. He looked like home. "I was just cataloging," she said, smiling faintly. "Everything's changing." He stepped closer, his hands sliding to her waist. "Not everything." She leaned into him. "I don't want to lose myself in all this. I want to stay me." "You wouldn't be you if you didn't say that out loud," he murmured against her hair. "I mean it. I know. And I love that about you." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't need filling. Then she pulled back slightly. I need to tell my mom. Ben paused. You haven't yet? She doesn't even know we're together. The last time I told her I was seeing someone, it ended with her mailing me a book on codependency and a list of therapists. He raised an eyebrow. Do I need to prepare for a maternal inquisition? She's cautious and opinionated, and she still thinks I should have gone into law. I can handle opinionated mothers. Francesca gave him a look. I handled mine. That made her laugh. Later that afternoon, she sat in her mother's kitchen, a place that always smelled faintly of lemon cleanser and dry herbs. The walls were lined with ceramic plates from countries her mother never visited but loved to collect. Judith Lowell was stirring a pot of soup like it was a high-stakes operation. You're quiet, her mother said without looking up. I have something to tell you. Judith didn't pause. Is this about the bookstore? Because if you're going to sell it, I'm not selling it. I bought into it. Her mother did look up then. You what? I'm part owner now. Judith blinked. You did that alone? No. With someone. Judith set the spoon down slowly. Ah. Francesca placed her hands on the table, palms down. His name is Ben, and we're engaged. Judith's mouth parted slightly. Engaged? Yes. Is this the same man you mentioned months ago? The reader. Francesca nodded. And now he's suddenly proposing? It wasn't sudden for us. It was quiet, thoughtful, and very real. Judith crossed her arms. Does he have a job? Francesca stared at her, then laughed. Yeah, he's an author. Judith frowned. You mean like books? Yes, he writes under a pen name B. Maddox. Judith's brows shot up. That's him. Yes. A long pause settled between them. Judith finally Saturday, well, that explains the Bentley parked outside. Francesca smiled softly. He's not his money, or his fame. He's kind and honest, and he listens in a way I didn't think people still did. Her mother's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. I only ever wanted you to be with someone who sees you. He does. Judith reached across the table, her hand covering Francesca's. Then that's all I need to know. They left the house mid-afternoon. Ben had waited patiently in the car, reading a manuscript. Francesca slid into the passenger seat, her hand finding his on the console. Well, he asked without looking away from the page. She approves. He grinned. Told you I could handle opinionated mothers. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a rhythm that felt like something more than coincidence. Francesca managed the bookstore with renewed purpose, hosting events and revamping their author spotlight series. She started writing again, really writing. Not short fragments or forgotten poems, but chapters. A novel. Her first. Ben worked from home more often. His desk moved closer to the window, so he could hear the city and her voice when she wandered into the room with coffee or an idea. They read each other's work without judgment, only curiosity. One evening, they walked through the park as the first hints of spring painted the trees with soft green. The air was cool, but not cold, and the sky was streaked with gold and lavender. Ben held her hand, his thumb brushing over the ring on her finger like a reminder. You know what I've been thinking about? Whether pigeons are secretly government spies? He laughed. That too. But mostly, the idea of permanence. How everyone's always terrified of it. But what if it's not about staying the same but growing in the same direction? She looked up at him. That sounds like a great line for a book. He paused. It's not for a book. It's for us. Spring bled into summer and the days stretched longer. They hosted friends for dinners, took weekend trips upstate, and mailed out simple, elegant wedding invitations. Not for a gala. Not for a spectacle. Just a ceremony in a garden, attended by the people who mattered. On the morning of the wedding, Francesca stood in the bookstore before hours, barefoot in her silk robe, surrounded by shelves that had once been her only safe place. Now she had another. Harper walked in with a bouquet of pale peonies and a look that said she'd been crying for at least 20 minutes. I knew you'd get here, she whispered, handing over the flowers. But I didn't know you'd do it so beautifully. Francesca smiled, tears stinging at the corners of her eyes. I didn't know either. Until I met him. Outside, the garden was quiet but alive. Strings of soft lights hung from the trees, and guests murmured as they took their seats. There were no cameras, no press, just the low hum of a cello and the scent of jasmine in the air. Ben stood at the altar in a navy suit, his hands folded, eyes searching until they landed on her. She walked toward him slowly, every step steady, her heart calm. When their eyes met, there was no fear, only certainty. The vows were simple, unscripted. "Francesca," Ben said, voice low, "you are the story I didn't know I was writing. And now I don't want to write anything without you in it." She took his hands. "You made me believe in pages I hadn't opened yet. You reminded me that love doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be honest." The officiant smiled. "With the power vested in me by the state of New York and a few 100,000 readers who'll be very excited to read the acknowledgments page, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss was soft, sure, and unshakably theirs. Afterward, they danced under the stars as the city flickered in the distance. No spotlight, no stage. Just two people who had once met by chance in a bookstore. And now they were everything. They spent their honeymoon in a villa near the Amalfi Coast where the days were slow and the nights were filled with the sound of the sea through open windows. Francesca rode on the terrace while Ben cooked. They walked through lemon groves and got lost in cliffside towns, never once checking their phones. When they returned, things didn't go back to normal. They became better. Francesca published her first novel, a quiet, emotional story about a woman who learns how to rewrite her life. It received modest acclaim, but it wasn't the reviews that mattered. It was the look on Ben's face when he read the final page. "You didn't just find your voice," he told her. "You gave it wings." She framed the first printed copy and hung it on the wall beside his. They didn't need more. Not penthouses or spotlights or bestsellers. They had each other. And that was the most beautiful story of all.